I don't know. I think people are
I've
trickling in, but it says plus 41 others. So probably like four.
okay, plus 41 others. Plus 41 others. Well, thank you everybody for coming, for joining. Um, it's been very exhausting just being on Twitter these last couple days. As you all know, the fascist propaganda is out of control, and this time it's the diaspora being sort of useful idiots for the Bukele administration. Um, but you know, we kind of expected it would get here, and um, so I wanted to just have this session so we can sort of all be on the same page, and get some resources on how to talk to this with our folks, because you know, every single one of us in this room who's Salvadoran probably has a family member who has fallen for misinformation, or you know, their fascist tendencies are coming through, especially you know, as this relates to those of us who came during the war era and what this means for us. But before we get started, I kind of just want to introduce sort of the folks who are going to speak. I'm going to be basically asking questions and you know, giving my commentary here and there. Feel like you all hear a lot from me on Twitter, but I want to introduce Jorge. Jorge Cuellar is one of my good friends and a professor at Dartmouth College of Latin American and Caribbean Studies. Jorge is also Salvadoran himself, grew up there. We met out in the LA area, actually in university, and you know, we've been friends ever since. And feels like sometimes we're going crazy out here with the Bukele misinformation. So we decided to do this. But Jorge, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, hey Daniel, thanks for having me, man. It's always good to connect and talk and stuff, and especially around, these kinds of things. I mean, I wish it was under better circumstances, but it's important to get this conversation started and rap with other people about it as well. So I'm Jorge Cuellar, Salvadoran. Came to the U.S. when I was 4. I was born over there, obviously, and I go back a lot for my research. My research is on contemporary El Salvador. I look at questions of disappearance, of transit, about also elder pensions. Just looking at and studying ways that people make life amidst conditions that are less than ideal, which has been the case for El Salvador for the last 40 years, basically, if not more. At least as long as I've been alive. And yeah, like Daniel said, we met at in UCSB, and we've been friends ever since, and just keeping a tab on what's happening in El Salvador, given that both of us still have family over there. We're really connected over there. We go back all the time, and so it pains us to see, at least, well, it pains me specifically to see how folks are taking up Bukele's discourse and really just regurgitating it without any kind of critical analysis. And yeah, I've been out here in New Hampshire at Dartmouth College teaching for the last 3, 4 years, going on 4 years. And it's a pleasure to be here and have this conversation. I think we all need to sort of look behind the smoke screen a little bit, and hopefully we can do some of that tonight.
Yeah. So I also want to introduce Gatix Negatix. I don't know how you say that. I suck. But my friend Nico. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself. Nico is a fierce abolitionist, and he's gonna bring a lot of they're gonna bring a lot of wisdom. If you can just introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. What's up, y'all? So, name's Nico, they, them pronouns. So I'm based out in New York City. Been here all my life. I'm a researcher here, focusing mainly on things around like youth justice, Rikers Island, how trans young people and queer people navigate the criminal legal system here in the United States. I also do some work around developing abolition-oriented networks across Latin America. So a lot of things in Argentina and Mexico, and then like growing, networks in El Salvador, and just sort of like the continental connections between things like the NYPD and their presence, not only across the Americas, but across the world, and in terms of the work that they do in terms of like training and giving resources to other countries and police departments and sort of like spreading, the carceral strait beyond the United States. So yeah, and like, met Danny a while ago on these Twitter streets, and we've linked up in person. But and also Jorge, I love your work. I constantly
What's up,
like
Nico?
reference what's up, like your articles, and I also teach undergrad. I teach at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, part of CUNY. So around like mass incarceration. So yeah, so and I think my connection here, my dad came um, fleeing the Civil War in the 80s. And a lot of my family came after him, and but still had a lot of family there, and a lot of family who fled across the world, not just during the Civil War, but after it, in the most recent waves of forced migration, not only to the United States, but to Europe, other parts of Latin America. Um, and so, yeah, here to really talk about the connections of how we bring abolition to the conversation and a lot of the lessons learned here, especially in New York, when it comes to policing mass incarceration. And I think, like Jorge said, the smokescreen that mass incarceration reduces crime and makes it safer. And that is just not the case. So, yeah, I'll bring it back to you, Danny.
Awesome. Thank you for that intro. So, I titled this kind of informally "No Cerote Left Behind" just because I'm angry, and I've just been sort of lashing out at people who have been, saying really dangerous things, and I'm so mad, so mad. And I had to I went to the gym, I just took a shower, I have some wine going to just calm me down because this is a topic that is just like been so irritating. I know a lot of you are sort of in the same boat with me. I know a lot of you maybe aren't as passionate but want to know more. So, you know, first things first, we've been seeing a lot of misinformation going around this week. Salvadorans in the diaspora, including like quote unquote DK progressives, like with BLM and ACAB, all cops are bastard in their profiles, but then they're saying that control Bukele's plan territorial control total is a good thing, that it's built, and that building a mega prison it's a good thing. Um, And the fact is that El Salvador now has surpassed the U.S. for the most incarcerated country per capita in the world. And we don't all know, but we should know that the U.S. for a long time has had that top role. And we're still the country probably with the most mass incarceration, probably by like amount, and not per capita. And so, you know, a lot of people are sort of very inconsistent. Like, they're anti-police in this country, they're for human rights in this country, but when it comes to El Salvador, suddenly that all goes out the window. Their politics go out the window. It's like let's throw everybody in jail. So I want to dispel some like prevailing myths that have been going around El Salvador. And one of the things is this like El Salvador is quote unquote safe now, right? So crime is going down. Isn't that a good thing? Is that even the actual picture? Jorge, can you give us sort of just like a general overview of like some of these myths? And like, isn't it a good thing that crime is going down in El Salvador? Are we just making something out of nothing over here?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Daniel. So like, I want to take it in like kind of three parts. Like one myth I think is El Salvador getting safer. That's one of them. Another myth is Bukele is good and Salvadorans are happy, right? Three, corruption is gone and crime is down, right? And then there may be a fourth one there about when we can get to that about disappearances and lack of transparency and stuff like that. But the first one, is El Salvador getting safer? That's a big myth that I've been seeing folks repeating quite a bit. And I think it's a very complex issue, right? But one might say that yes, El Salvador is getting safer. El Salvador is safer now. And the reason I say that, which might sound like the wrong thing to say in this kind of space, is because indeed gangs have been disarticulated. Like El Faro put it in that really controversial editorial that sent everybody like wondering, wait, are the gangs gone? Right? But the fact is that we need to look a little bit deeper to what this getting safer really means, right? From my perspective, I think the gangs are in a kind of holding retreat, right, due to this full court press against them, and that's undeniable. Extortions are historically low. Petty crime and violent crime is historically low as well. But I don't know if this is exactly like something that is to be applauded for to the Bukele administration. In fact, it's long time coming, and it's a long time coming because of the kinds of NGO work, human rights work that has been happening. Even the churches have been an incredible resource in minimizing and demobilizing gang members and getting them out of the gang life, right? So it's a lot of things that have converged in this moment, and Bukele is taking credit for all of it, and actually adding upon it by the spectacle of the prison, showing these tattooed folks all in the media, right, coming out and speaking courageously about the work that the police and the military do. But really, the question is, what does this all mean, right? It means that the gangs, as we know them, have changed. They really have changed. The men, women, and children that participated in gangs have been taken off the streets and placed in jail through this regime of exception or state of exception, as people call it. Right, this thing has been ongoing almost like a year now. I started in March 2022, and then on Valentine's Day, all Salvadorans got another gift, another extension. Uh, and so, we've been living in this reality for about a year now. But what like that state of exception, often we understand it in the diaspora, right? As this kind of sweeping of gangs, as this kind of social cleansing that's happening, that the streets are getting cleaned up and whatever. But really, what the state of exception is a legal reality where the people's rights, citizen rights, are totally thrown out the window. And what this means also for the side of the state, right, is that they can abuse power, which is what we've seen with police and military. They, at their discretion, they'll just like pick on people, like, hey, you look like are up to no good. You come with me. Let's take you to the prison, right? Let's put you in detention. That's the kind of thing that's been happening, and people from neighborhoods that are popular neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, working class neighborhoods are the ones who are being picked up and picked on, right, indiscriminately by the state, who's been emboldened with this, suspension of rights, which is the state of exception, to do these kinds of things. So the safety, right, this kind of, is El Salvador getting safer, or is El Salvador safe again? We really need to look a little bit beyond, right, to see that the so-called safety that people are talking about is like dependent on, right, the eviscerating of everybody's rights, as a matter of law. And the fact that Bukele keeps extending this and making it into a permanent regime or state of exception, is exactly part of this kind of authoritarian power grab that's been going on from the beginning. So that's one of those things, right? And amidst all the captures that have been going on, innocent people have been taken. The human rights organization Cristosal, that compiles a lot of this data, they've said, right, that people who have nothing to do with gangs are being swept up in this, and we don't see that in the media, right? What we consume in the media and in the op-eds and all this kind of stuff is that things are getting safer because the gangs are getting put away, right? They're not seeing any sunlight, I think is what Bukele called it, or said last time he paraded tattooed bodies on television. Um, but what we're seeing is actually, no, there's a lot of people who are caught in this dragnet, that have nothing to do with this. And this is precisely the kind of social problem in El Salvador around insecurity, that in a country that has had gangs for 30 years, right? Like, everybody's a suspect. Everybody is connected in one way, shape, or form with gang activity, right? The social fabric itself is, very much imbricated with gang activity. And so this is how, like, the policy by the state to attack gangs in this kind of militarized way ends up being an attack on the poor, ends up being an attack on the working class, and ends up being an attack on, the neighborhoods that I'm from, the neighborhoods that we're all from, I bet, you know? And so that's one of them. What's one of them? And then the other thing is that, like, it seems like for Salvadorans in the diaspora is that we think that all insecurity is gang insecurity, and that's not true, right? That's not true. There's so many other kinds of insecurity that Salvadorans face in the country, right? What about domestic violence? What about water insecurity, food insecurity, violence against queer folks, substance abuse, racism against indigenous people and Afro descendants? All those things are opaque to us in the diaspora if the only thing that we're being shown as being, the insecurity problem is gangs, right? And because it's literally false. And so those other things that I just mentioned, those are at all-time highs, right? Those indices, those statistics that are an all-time high. But Bukele is putting away the gang, so it's all good, right? And that's the problem that I'm seeing in the way that people are reacting with this kind of it's safe in El Salvador. What it,
Yeah,
go,
yeah. Let me interrupt you for
yeah,
a
yeah.
second. So yeah, so you're seeing that just because gangs are being put away, quote unquote, and going, that kind of crime is going down. Um, for one, homicides may be down, but disappearances are up. I had a chance to talk with journalists who had to flee the country, Brian Avelar, who was talking about disappearances are going up. Disappearances are going up. So what does that mean? Um, People are being put in like clandestine graves, and mass graves, which echoes back to our civil war. And on top of that, there's other social ills that are like happening in El Salvador that are not being addressed. Like for one, there's like people can't afford eggs, just like the U.S., but probably even worse. Sorry, that's my cat. He's very passionate about this too. And also, um, what else was it? The other day they shut down the Kunanawat, or they stopped giving funding to the
Yeah.
Kunanawat, which is one of the only language revitalization programs for indigenous languages in the country. And so you're seeing all of these things fall by the wayside. El Salvador is spending a lot of money on Bitcoin. You're seeing an economic crisis, but it's fine because foreigners can take their iPhone out and and be safe the 2 weeks that they're there. So I wanted to kind of like just get into the images that we're seeing. These images are powerful. We're seeing these images of like tattooed gang members tied up on the floor. And Salvadorans, especially on those diaspora, like cheering on these photos. Like, but something that interesting that got pointed out to me on Twitter was that are these even accurate? Like, are these like representative of the people that they are detaining? So if you look at these, someone said, let me see this. So like Cesar Savaria, Cesar underscore 1908 on Twitter, said that the majority of gang members that Bukele shown in his videos look like they're like 40 and up. It's very different. They're very different from the average person in detention under this regime, which are usually, you know, young people under 30 years old, which is what the organizations on the ground saying, the human rights organizations on the ground saying. So it's just like it's creating this false sense of like, oh look, we're capturing the criminals, where it's just like they've had these dudes locked up for a while. Like I said, they look like dads, they look like 40-year-olds, right? But I don't know if Nico, Jorge, or anyone listening wants to jump in on sort of like the sort of psychological warfare that is happening with these images.
Let me. You want to say something real quick, Nico?
Uh,
Jump in.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think like what we really have to focus on in terms of just the narrative that's being constructed around images, thinking critically about the misinformation we're getting, and again, like what the images both present as reality and then what it obscures, right? Because again, I mean, one, if we're talking about like what evidence do we have of what's going on, the prison system across El Salvador right now is like a black box, right? We have very little information, we have very little data to rely on. And so, a lot of the ways that we can even engage has to be through a lot of the efforts that are happening on the ground. This is why it's really important for folk like focused on human rights and recording a lot of the experiences of people being incarcerated is really important, because right now we don't know what's actually happening inside. We don't know the age breakdown, for example, but we do know, right, from anecdotal sort of like stories and what's coming out of El Salvador, that there are a lot of young people getting caught up, right? And the system right now, even as Bukele is talking about, does not care. they don't really care about having a data system in place to track where people are going through. They have like no recourse to lawyers, to due process. And so the black box right now is what we have aside from these images and this narrative that's being pushed, that's painting, right? Like Jorge said, the violence is purely from like coming from the gangs. That's why everything's going down. That's central to the problem, and it obscures all the other type of violences people are experiencing, right? Not even that's just state sanctioned, but when we're thinking about folk passing through El Salvador, when we're thinking about queer and trans folk, when we're thinking about women, right? When we're thinking about femicide, also the bigger context of not just El Salvador, but all of Central America and Mexico to the north, and then the rest of like these migration networks across South America. And so right now we just don't have data, right? And then we have a lot of just big claims that are related to this about, you know, like, look who it is, look like, and it looks scary. Like it's doing such a good job. I mean, we have decades at this point of like messed up media telling us these stories and these narratives, but it's really working because you will see this on all you'll say, like you see people across social media just talking about, yeah, this is what they deserve, look at like all these people with all these tattoos. And the state is being very, very good at just like, yeah, take these pictures, this is who we want on the front pages, this is who we want for you to imagine the people we're locking up. And like, if you actually, if we had the information, it wouldn't be that.
Yeah, I wanna add to what Nico just said. It's true. It is a black box. There is no information. It's primarily anecdotal things that we're finding, investigative journalism. But even the journalism, right, is something that's under attack. Community groups and NGOs that are these kinds of watchdogs, human rights watchdogs, have also been under attack, right? That we see this kind of if we have the punitive end of the Bukele project being the mega prison and the or super militarization of El Salvador, then on the other hand, we have this kind of frontal attack against all the quote unquote opposition groups that might, have information or be vehicles for, transparency and for, shedding light on things like the elimination of due process, right? Shedding light on these things, on police abuses, right? But again, it's still very a limited data set, so we don't know the scale of this thing. We only get the slices that the Bukele administration wants to present to us, right? That wants to show us. Even the funding behind the mega prison is very opaque, right? Like it was given to a construction company in San Salvador that are very connected to the Bukele clan, right? So we have some of that information, but we don't know how much was paid for it. We don't have any. Usually for these kinds of things, mega projects and any kind of construction projects, right? There's a public kind of competition for that contract. That's usually the case in other places. In El Salvador, that was never the case. It was handpicked who was going to take the responsibility of building out the prison. So we see this. We can't like the real question for me is like, is it worth it, right? Is it worth this kind of fleeting sense of temporary security for what basically is a surveillance state, a kleptocratic state, an authoritarian state, right? And one where even things like free speech are on the way to being criminalized, and being eliminated altogether.
So we just have Mario that joined. And For those that don't know Mario Gomez, he was arrested for talking against sort of the Bitcoin move, and in a very fascist move with no like police warrant or anything, he got arrested. There goes my cat. Um, and so he just joined as a speaker. I don't know, Mario, if you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you're hearing, and as someone who recently has had to leave El Salvador because of this problem out there, because of this regime.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the mic for a couple of minutes. Yeah, I think that yeah, they want to paint this image of what is the stereotype of the gang members, and unfortunately, I think, and I was writing a couple of tweets early today, because I think that they are trying to paint this image of how a gang member looks like. But I have been living my whole life in El Salvador, and I remember that by the first mano dura, the first this militarization of the police, and when they started to try to get in prison all the gang members. This was early 2000 something under the Francisco Flores administration, that is the right wing party Arena, uh, because they are starting to trying to get everyone with tattoos in prison. The response within the gang members was to stop tattooing themselves, and it was very interesting, because I personally think that that was one of the reasons why they started to attack civilians, because before the first mano dura, they had a way to distinguish the members of a rival gang in El Salvador. But after the first mano dura, they stopped this practice of tattooing themselves, and in exchange, they adopted more subtle ways to recognize each other. And it was a very big problem, I think, because they started to target people, civilians, like they call us, because they didn't have a way to recognize who was a member of another gang, or even a police officer within the general population. So this image of the gang member that has tattoos on his full body or even in his face was something that is in the past, at least for Salvadorian gangs, and this is something that we don't see anymore since 2010, I think, more or less. So yeah, it is true what Cesar said early today, that all these pictures of the gang members in the jails looks like they are older members that were captured so long ago, and they have been like in the jail for at least one decade, I can imagine, because this is what was common so many years ago. And and you're right, the common crime has not stopped. There was a survey a couple of months ago from this university, from the UCA, and it was very interesting, because when you look at the numbers, people say that they still have like a lot of incidents of common crime. They even have a trend of the reporting of common crime for this survey that they do fairly regularly. So what you look in the trend is the common crime is almost the same. Violence against women has increasing, missing people is increasing, at least from the reports that we have. So what this is telling you is that most of the crime in El Salvador maybe is not gang related, as they have trying to paint it. But what is like really sad for me, because I left the country 1 year and a half ago, is to draw these parallels in the kind of policies that are being implemented in El Salvador right now, with what I can see in the way that the police here in the US tries to criminalize poor people and marginalize the communities. And I was talking with a friend a couple of days ago, and she told me that maybe the reason why people doesn't say anything about what is happening in El Salvador, in particular people living here in the US, is because it's what they see every day. They see the replication of the same kind of policies that the police implements here in the US. They are no looking back at El Salvador. Maybe people that left El Salvador so many years ago, or even Salvadorians from the second or even third generation, and they see this in El Salvador, and they think that this is some kind of improvement, because they are no like seeing this way of police brutality that they are normally they normally see here in the U.S. being applied to people in El Salvador, and then you add all the propaganda around it to make people think that they are using all these policies against criminals, when in reality it's just poor people, and they are like cleaning up the country of the poor peoples to give space to these new oligarchs, to these multimillionaires, including all the Bitcoiners that are coming now to El Salvador, and probably many new business models that are mostly focused on extracting the little wealth that we have in El Salvador. So that's what I wanted to say, and thanks for giving me space.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for hopping on this and giving your perspective, because I think it's important to hear from folks who have been directly impacted out in El Salvador and have seen and live the Bukele regime day to day. I see that someone, Griska, has requested. I'll give you a second, but I wanted to ask something to Nico, actually. Um, how is police and prison abolition in the U.S. related to what's going on in El Salvador? I think, Mario touched on a good point that so much of these policies, hi gatito, so much of these policies were imported from the U.S. to El Salvador. The gang problem was important to the U.S. El Salvador. It's something, that I think a lot of us already kind of internalized on some level, but we have to keep that in mind as well, is that especially when Diaspora are doing so much misinformation like we saw this last couple of days, is that the consistencies of politics, being anti-police in the US, but then in El Salvador, like, they're basically Blue Lives Matters with these little memes. So I wanted to get Nico your perspective on, just how intimate um, police and prison industrial complex from the US is involved in El Salvador, and just get your insights on that. And then I'll go to you, Griska. I'll add you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, I mean, I'm going to start here. So, a lot of what I saw yesterday and the past few days when these images came up was a lot of folk bringing up sort of the stories about family members who've been impacted by gang violence. And, like, I think a lot of us understand that, right? I mean, I think there are very few Salvadorans in El Salvador or in the diaspora, especially if you have family who were forced to flee because of the violence, um, aren't impacted in some way by what's been happening in the past 30 years, right? And I want to start there by recognizing that what people are bringing up is a lot of the harm and trauma that they've experienced. And I want to be really quick to say that the state currently, and the Bukele administration is doing virtually nothing to address the harm people have experienced, the trauma that communities have experienced. And that, like, arresting communities or people in mass, like, let's even just say, like, we're arresting the so-called bad guys and the criminals. That still isn't addressing the very real material needs of folk who have been impacted by gang violence, who have been impacted by other things like poverty, like the lack of access to resources, to healthcare, to movement, to transportation, or just a recourse to address other types of harm that they've experienced that isn't related to the gangs. And so, one of the big things that I always try to make a connection to when it comes to discussions around abolitions and the connections that we all have here is that giving more money to the police, to military, and putting people in one of now the biggest prisons across the Americas is doing nothing to address the real harm and trauma El Salvador and folk in the diaspora have experienced. So that's first off. And so second is like, well, then what do we do, right? The evidence is pretty clear, however way you cut it. Having a higher rate of incarceration does not make us safer. If that were true, right, the United States would be the safest country on the planet, and it's not. We know that it's not. I'm not going to list out all the problems we have here in the U.S. related to gun violence, related to transphobic and queer antagonistic violence, whatever. We know, especially those of us who live here, we're in danger, right? Like, and it's not safe here for a bunch of
Girl,
other
you're in
reasons.
danger.
Yeah, no, truly. And so, what the evidence is telling us, however way you cut it, is that higher rates of incarceration doesn't make us safer. But actually, what we do know is that it does a lot to communities, right? It breaks up families. It takes away valuable resources. It creates these like ongoing traps. And it's also a business, right? The economics of mass incarceration, just like Jorge touched on earlier, right? We need money to build the prison. So, like, where did those contracts go? Who's training police officers and guards? And then all to the like minute details of it, like energy, right? The prison needs energy to run. It needs water to run. It needs clothes. It needs food. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if actually like contracts are going to like these big international companies, especially in the context of Bitcoin and a lot of foreign investors coming in. And so, mass incarceration is a lucrative business. And again, we can look to the US for all the evidence on like how people make money. And in very like random obscure ways. For example, Canon, the camera company, makes a lot of the x-ray machines that they sell to prisons and jails across the world. Actually, the State Department of Obama would buy these like machines from Canon, and part of like diplomatic relations would be just giving them to other countries so that they can use in their jails and in their prisons. And so, all that context to say is that like at the core of a lot of the movements here of like defund the police, for example, here in New York City, where the NYPD has an $11 billion budget, at the same time that we have a renting crisis and our mayor is cutting social services, is that where's the money for everything else, right? Where's the money in El Salvador for people who are poor, for young people who are poor especially, for folk who need access to healthcare? And on top of that, right, we're not even like, let's assume that like, okay, you want to live in a world where people have to earn their way or whatever. There's so much happening in El Salvador, like on the grounds economic, especially informal economic level, where Bukele is, in quotes, cleaning the streets, but at the same time, right, like los mercados en el centro, right, like it looks clean, it's open and everything. What did he do? He cleared away a bunch of the small stands and people selling like informal markets, informal economies. And so he's cutting away, right, like the little things that people have to survive with what little that they have. And so spending all of that resources, all that money on the cops, on a huge prison, which again, we don't even know like how much it necessarily costs and who got those contracts. And so nothing to do with addressing the harm and trauma people have experienced. And I could go on forever, but I'm going to stop there and just like make the point that, like arresting people en masse is actually not addressing what people need and have needed for 3 decades at this point. And they're still going to need them. It's not like miraculously everyone's okay now, right? Like, oh, everyone's in jail, everyone's in prison. I am healed, right? I have no mental health problems. I have no woes with poverty. I feel safe, but to what end?
Thank you, Nico, for that insight. And yeah, prisons don't keep us safe. Police don't keep us safe. Community keeps us safe. And I'm gonna, give the mic to Jorge because he asked, and then after Jorge, because Grisca requested, I'm gonna let them talk. But Jorge, say your piece.
Yeah, real quick, I just wanted to add to what Nico's saying in terms of the kind of the long-term trauma that will come from this regime of exception is that in the wholesale, capturing of working class people that are getting caught up in these sweeps, it's actually creating another criminalized class that when those folks are eventually released, right, they will have criminal records, they will likely want to migrate, they will be impacted by the criminal making system of El Salvador, and actually will lead to more social problems. Right, this thing is simply an unsustainable project that It's creating folks who will be permanently affected by it for the rest of their lives, right? Even if they're picked up, randomly by police and military discretion. And in terms of all of that, it's going to affect migration in the sense that folks will continue to migrate during the Bukele administration. Migration hasn't gone down at all. It remains at the same levels it has before he entered into power, right? But what these images, and going back to that point of images, right? What these images do is actually then begin to invalidate, right, the asylum claims that people make around insecurity, right? Because it looks like Bukele is cleaning up the streets, right? Everything looks good, everything's in order, and so it actually invalidates and can impact people's asylum cases who are migrating for a variety of other reasons, right? Because there's no single issue migrant, and I think we already know this, right? There's no single issue migrant. Folks are being impacted by many things at once, right? And so those kinds of threats are going to be perceived by the U.S. justice system and the migration system as no longer credible. And so I just wanted to add that part in terms of the impacts of all of it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. I will let you speak, Griska, in a second. I just want to say, this is not new. The reason we know this doesn't work, we know that this doesn't work long term, is because we've been here before. We are suffering because we don't know our history. Police and fascism is not new in El Salvador. How did we get the Civil War? Before the Civil War, we had a decade of fascism and police in the 1970s, even down to the 60s. My mom was born in 1950. And I want to say something. I'm white. I'm Chelito. I get it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. My mom is Afro-Salvadoran. My mom is Afro-Salvadoran. Her family have been activists forever because that's what they had to do to survive, to advocate for themselves, advocate for poor Salvadorans, and be communists. And so she tells me that what's going on in El Salvador reminds her of when she was a little girl in the 1960s, 1970s. She remembers police kicking down her door as a child to arrest her brothers, two of which were freedom fighters during the Civil War and died. We can call them guerrilleros. You could say what you want about them, but that's what they were to us. And I talk to my mom about this all the time, and it's heartbreaking because she's like, we've been here before. This is not new. Mano Dura is not new. Mano Dura against the gangs is from the 2000s. A lot of this is not new, and we're suffering, and our diaspora is sharing misinformation because we don't know our history, and that's really heartbreaking. But I just wanted to say that because the wine is hitting, and I'm feeling some kind of way. But um, I want to say that a lot of people have been requesting. A lot of them have been fascist accounts. I'm not going to let a fascist account, you know, come in here and say their stuff because they have enough on Twitter. They have enough space on Twitter. But I got this user Griska, seems to be friends with some folks. Seems to be cool. So bienvenidos. Like, I hope that you're cool. I hope that you're not a fascist. So say your piece. They're connecting right now. Okay.
Hey,
Okay.
hey,
Welcome.
hey, thank you. I really appreciate the space. I guess it's important to elevate the social consciousness about the topic that we're talking today, particular when you don't have so many spaces in English, right? And misinformation is a huge key in this dominated narrative. So I just wanted to say that I concur with everything that you have explained in different lens. And what is important, as I always discuss with everyone, is that it's not about what Arga says, it's not about what you said, it's about what academic and findings and evidence base says. And, we have to repeat many and many times, and we're not going to get tired repeating saying, well, having a mega carcel is not gonna it's not gonna resolve, it's not gonna fix the very deep root of the social issues that Salvadorian has and we have. So as many of you, I'm a Salvadorian. I have, all my life have been there. And many of us in the space might be that they're might be born in US in another part of the world, but we still are attached to the country XY reason, right? Whether it's a grandmother, whether it's a aunt or cousin, but anyone has something that it's, attached to it. So I just wanted to say that, you know the main reason here we're talking is because the dominator narrative that the government has right now, it's like mind blowing. Like there's no there everything is on reserve, everything it's not public, and that creates a whole different level of issues, because everything that the government just disseminate, then people just applaud without not thinking, where is this coming from, where is the source? And that's a big issue, because as I always reiterate with everyone, the more repression, the more skepticism you have, because there's no way you can analyze the data, as many of you stated. You said, well, uh, zero homicide does not translate in no having a safe place. Does that mean probably the homicide has been redefined? We need to ask these questions. We need to say, well, women being killed is still happening. Forced disappearance are still happening. So these questions are needs to be asked and need to be addressed when we say El Salvador is the safest place. Not even in the Central America, they even dare to say to the entire continent. So I mean, you kind of perceive the perception when you have official public servants saying that human rights are more important from the honest people than the dishonest people. Everyone here who has a study or has a level of understanding of formal instruction, we will know what a human rights are, and the amount of time we have fought for having the human rights. So we understand human rights, civil liberties are not negotiated. Why? Because El Salvador, as you stated, we're coming from a civil war. This is not new. The Iron Fist by Mano Dura from Arena, implemented it. This is not new. It's just the level of dynamics that is happening now with Bukele government. So I just wanted to, like I said, support what you have said. There's no, in my perception, there's no way that this government is going to throw programs to reintegrate, it seems like these correctionals and mega carcels are more for tortures, are more for abuse of power. And the people get this perception about justice slash revenge, which is not the same. In a serious society, we look for, justice as much as we want to be near to the concept, right? But it's not that. It's quite the opposite, right? And I just wanted just to finish off by saying that you know the issue with criminal organization like MS-13 and all these gangs, you know is not thinking about deeper about the social and systematic issues rooted in the society: poverty, the lack of support for single mothers, for LGBTQ community, for youth. Yeah, they don't have the opportunity, and all these things will continue if the root causes, the systematic and the structural issues are not being addressed. And that is not because, again, it's not because I said it. It's because evidence based has shown that that's the path. Lastly, I just wanted to say I'm not based in US, and that's why sometimes for me it's hard to kind of discuss this topic, because we have totally different approach in Canada. And not that this is a paradise, because it's not, and I'm not stating that way, but it's kind of uh, conflict with me when he says he wants to uh, be like this, when the per capita inmate rates is going down instead of, you as a neighbor that you stated going up, and is a business. So I mean, point of reference, this government has suggested to be like Singapore, and just so that's the point of reference for this government, and they applaud, right? So I just wanted to, again reiterate that I concur with everything you have said and stated today, and that we need to be, the more repression that we're having, we need to be more skeptical, questioning things, having the critical thought about what this government is, dominating their narrative and the dialogue, and having more spaces like these contribute to elevate the social consciousness, and hopefully people will, connect point A to point B, right? So thank you so much. I know that this subject is so passionate to talk about, but I know that there are other people that want to talk and just to, input their thoughts and ideas in here. But I really appreciate that you really, really are doing these spaces. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Griska. It's important for us to, listen to people on the ground. And thank you for not being a fascist troll account, because I was scared. Like, I have to gatekeep. I can't just give everyone the mic. But, thank you for saying what you said, because we need to have a better dialogue. We have the technology now. Um, but I have a couple people who have requested. I just want to say that if you want to make this a weekly thing, like, let's do this. Like, we need to sort of elevate the consciousness of our folks. We need to translate what we're learning, translate what we're seeing, from trusted news sites to our relatives. And I just want to just I saw a tweet from Yesiareli Yesenia, and she said to Nico's point, to Gatek's Negrek's point about prison contracts. Part of the state of exception, like the state of emergency during COVID, includes expediting the government contract processes and allows Bukele to bypass the requirements that make acquiring government contracts transparent. I really don't know the context of that, but I just wanted to make sure that Yesi's point was heard. I do want to say that you know we are a people who have always been skeptical. Like, our, those of us, some of our relatives survived an incredibly awful dark period of fascism in El Salvador. They've survived genocides, those of us who have indigenous and Afro-descendant families. And so we've always been a very skeptical people. We've always been a very skeptical people. And it's fucking weird to me that now we just accept what the government says without being skeptical. We've thrown all of that out the window. We've thrown our ancestors under the bus, and we become fascists, and that's not okay. And that's why we're having this space. I know La Sirena has been wanting to talk, so I'm gonna add her as a speaker. La Sirena, you have the mic next. Okay, she's connecting. 3, 2, 1. Hi, bienvenidos.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I had to get out, come back into my phone. I don't know how to do Twitter Spaces. I think I'm a little too old for this.
It's good. We hear you. That's what matters.
Great. First of all, I just want to thank you, Daniel, for open up this space, and Nico, and also Jorge for having this space for all of us. Because honestly, like, it's funny. I just had some family for the first time going to El Salvador, in like a really long time, and I had a conversation that didn't make me feel so great about my so-called like very like progressive family. And I'm glad that we had this space, because I was also like pissed for having these conversations. And I think I want to say that it was you who said, either you or Nico, tweeted about like we have to have these conversations with our families. And I'm really glad, to be here and having this conversation with all of y'all, and for this space as well. And to that point, like, I definitely second everything that everyone has said. But I also, like, I think it's important for us as a diaspora to understand that not all the violence in El Salvador at some point had to that much to do with the Maras themselves. There's also other things happening, and I feel like part of the misinformation is just that we're constantly being fed all these like. The maras, the maras, the maras, the maras. And it's just like, I think we really need to be critical about that. Because, for example, in my own personal story, like my story of migration had to do with the war, but it also had to do with domestic violence. And it's like, do I necessarily feel safe going back to El Salvador? No, because we were escaping domestic violence, not necessarily the maras. And I think that's really important to think about. Like, what is, Bukele's doing about that? Like, I have no idea. And we're not seeing that. And I think we need to be really critical of that. I also feel like in the diaspora, we need to be very critical of our own privileges. Because, like I was saying, with these family members that I had somewhat of a weird like conversations, I quickly realized that a lot of their perspective had to do with their privileges. It had to do with like them being middle class here in New York, like one of the like more expensive cities in the world. Like, you're being middle class, it makes a big difference on how you perceive and the information that you're being fed, and what it means like to be safe in El Salvador. So, for example, with a lot of my family members, they ended up going to resorts, and they were like, "Oh, we felt so safe." I'm like, you would have felt safe in El Salvador at any point if you were only going to the resorts. Like, that's not where the gangs used to hang out. Like, that's not what it happens. And I think as diaspora, we really need to think of how our own privileges come into place as people that don't, like, for example, for me, like, I came here when I was a teenager, but I'm so, distanced in that way. And that also has a certain level, something to definitely think about. When I'm having discussions of El Salvador, I know that I'm not there, and I know that I can like have these conversations, and I'm not having that fear. And I have other families that every time I have a conversation that I actually want to have an open conversation about the government, they pause. And I feel like in that pause, that's where I can see Bukele's fascism. Because if it wasn't like that, there would not necessarily be a pause.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that they will think about it. I don't think that they will be like, oh, actually, I don't want to be associated with it. I think there is that pause, and that, my family has gone through the horrors of war, just like a lot of our families. And I think that it's important for us to really be critical, really look at the pages that we're looking at, or really like have, like you just said, Daniel, like have that that inquiry, that critical thinking, when we're looking at this stuff, and be like, okay, why is this coming from? Like, what do they want? Or like, not even what do they want, like, what am I getting, like, what am I receiving? And not only with Salvadorian politics, but like with anything else. Like, a good chunk of why, like, we saw, for most of us in the diaspora, we saw the machine at work with the Trump administration, and we saw the misinformation. And I
Yep.
find it
And Bukele was friends with Trump. He said, "How cool! He uses Twitter just like me." Continue.
exactly. And then we see, Bukele over a Fox News, right? So I think it's very important for us to think about that. And honestly, like, what does that mean? And I also want to point out, what does it mean to have like, um, solidarity, like for when we're thinking of anti-blackness, like, what does it mean to say BLM here? What does it mean to say ACAB here? And then all of a sudden we're like changing our politics for El Salvador. It just doesn't make any sense. And I'm mostly referring to, the last quote unquote discourse that we all had on Twitter over the last few days. So I think
Mhm.
these spaces are incredibly important, and I really thank you guys for having me. And I really thank you guys for opening this space. And I also really want to point out to all of us that, these are difficult conversations to have. So I hope that you guys are taking care of yourselves. I am a student therapist, so that's why I also say it. And, as we move forward, I hope that you guys are really being mindful that these are difficult conversations that need to be had, but that you guys also take care of yourselves. So that's it.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. I think it's important. You touch on a lot of important things. Our privilege as diaspora, we get disconnected. We forgot where we come from. We come here and then we go to the resorts and we're very disconnected from what the average Salvadoran lives day to day. And again, the political inconsistency of how do we have BLM, um, all cops are bastard in our profiles when it comes to the US, but then we support policing and we support militarism in El Salvador. And, by extension, Nayib Bukele is a child of fascist Maximiliano Hernandez who tried to outlaw Afro Salvadorans who committed indigenous genocide. So we have to keep in mind who is being ethnically cleansed in these gang sweeps. They're targeting racialized people. They're not going to Santa Elena. They're not going to Santa Tecla. They're not going to Antiguo Cuscatlan. They're going into the most marginalized areas and profiling people. That's what this regime is doing when people think they are you know killing mareros. Like, these are like 17-year-old kids. Like, I'm telling you, like, I bring this up all the time. I know I'm white, my mother's Afro Salvadoran. I've had my cousins who, like, they go out into the streets and they get profiled. They get, the military searches their phone because they look suspicious for some reason because of where they live and how they look like. So we think that El Salvador and the US have different rules, and that's not the case. So we've been an hour into this. I have a bunch of people, you know on this. So I'm just going to open it up for the next 30 minutes because I need to go to bed. It is late on the East Coast, but for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to open it up to the people. I've gone onto your profiles to verify and gatekeep because I'm not going to let a Salvadoran fascist take over this space. So we have um, Xochitl, we have Guineo, we have Catherine, Miguel, and Bum. I can't read your full names. I'm on an iPhone Mini. I can't see all the names. This was the budget phone. So sorry about that.
Daniel, can I jump in real quick? Just want
Yeah,
to
jump
quick
in.
comment. While you like cue someone up to speak, and maybe Jorge, you can add real quick too. But I think a lot of us are thinking about, like, something that honestly comes up is like, oh, but you're not in El Salvador, or also like, why are you concerned if you're in the United States? And that's a actually really great point. And the way that I engage with that question, it's like, yeah, let's talk about where we are right now, right? I'm in New York, and a lot of the lessons, or just what we're living through, right? New York City is a police state. We have essentially what is like an occupying military force with the NYPD, Rikers Island, which has seen over the past 3 years almost, like, on average 20 people die per year, cutting in social services. We live, right, in a racist, white supremacist, anti-Black, anti-Latinx sort of city, right? And all of that is tied to policing. And so I think, part of the conversations we also have to have so that we develop sort of an international solidarity is being like, listen, I'm not even just talking about cops in El Salvador, right? I'm talking about cops here. And we already have a lot of the lessons that, that are allowing us to predict the future. We know how things are going to go, right? We have like a history here in the United States that is telling us what are going to be the long-term impacts of mass incarceration in El Salvador. And again, going to the point, and I understand this, again, like, just the deeply emotional aspect of what's been happening in El Salvador, but also across the continent, right? Like, this fascism and police violence and brutality isn't exclusive to El Salvador. It's like continental, the problem, and it keeps growing. But that's saying, again, like what are our experiences here telling us? And also as a way to like sort of divert any political pipeline to Republicans, to the right, because like I know that we want to, I think it's true that we have like BLM and ACAP in our bio, and then we're like pro Bukele. There's a lot of our folk that are very much like I love the cops, that are very much like I love the military. That like, you know what, I kind of agree with Republicans, right? Like when we're thinking about like religious aspects, economic aspects, like suddenly you middle class, oh great, now like, everyone has to pull themselves up. So I think, I don't want to ever like exclude the conversation, be like, just because, no, I was born in New York. I'm a New Yorker. I'm like from the Republic of New York. Like I'm not going to lie here and say I understand El Salvador, but I do understand connections, right? And those connections run deep. Our communities are intertwined, and we have a lot of lessons to learn from each other.
Thank you for that. Okay, up next, Xochitl, and then Guineo. First, Xochitl, let's go.
Thank you. Well, I didn't realize I got the mic. Just a second, please. Well, thank you for organizing this. This is what we really need in terms of we need to pose the threat to Bukele's investment in social media, and we need to come up with a strategy to, because they have galvanized the opinion of the world through social media. And well, a group of us have been agitating on the network for quite some time now, and we realized that Bukele has created a message for each face. Say, for example, he talks to the right, he talks to the left, he talks to the Bitcoiners. So there is a customized message for each of the faces, and so in a way, he is the common denominator, and when everything interjects, it ends up supporting him. So, for example, a lot of people think that Bukele, because he's coming from the FMLN, he's a left. But when he talks to the people at the Heritage Foundation, they identified him as a right winger. And then when he talks to the Bitcoiners, and then he has created these many loopholes that he benefits from. And the other thing that is very important for him to get this type of support is that he they have studied our weakest links. As a society, we lack of identity. For example, we don't have La Sonora Dinamita, or we don't have those type of artists. So he has portrayed himself through propaganda as a celebrity type of thing. And when people hear from other nationalities saying, Salvadorians here saying, oh, your president is the best, it's a matter of feeling that gap of identity, lacking of identity, that people feel okay, very happy about it. And I think that we need to create a strategy that we should stop just whining on the network. We need, if we devote 1 2 hours to be um, on Twitter, for example, we need to kind of be able to push through that. And I don't know, this is not going to be solved by volunteering. This has to be something like a militant type of resistance. We are facing the brutality of the state, from the state, right? So the call here is for you guys. I have children who might be your age, and I am always talking to my children here in Canada and saying, you are Salvadorians, and they feel very connected to the culture. And we only speak Spanish at home, for example. And it's a matter of your generation to get involved in the media to counteract Bukele, because this is a matter of a network, design. He's able to say lies on the network, and that's the way he is winning this fight. Because it's not a fight. We are playing chess or something here. So he shows stuff that are fake news as real. So we need to be able to counteract with the real facts. But whatever happens outside of the networks is like it never existed, right? So we need to give this fight on the network, and you guys, you got it right. We're going to follow through with a strategy that is able to call everyone to jump in. Let's stop wasting time in useless conversations amongst us, and let's put out one message a day. For example, today we are pushing for justicia para los inocentes, the hashtag, right? If there's no hashtag, that message goes nowhere. Things like that. You know what I mean. So the call is for us to organize to fight back on social media, right? And thank you guys for doing this. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you guys, because this means that we are growing, right? And this is just a matter of time. We don't have to let this to get to 2024. Bukele is going to fall before he's going to fall down before that. He doesn't he's not able to be the president of a country for many reasons. He's going to destroy our country, and once it's destroyed and completely burned down, he's going to escape with the money. We don't have to let that happen. He has to be put in jail before he leaves, before it gets to 2024, because this is enough.
Thank you,
Enough
Xochitl.
people is
Xochitl,
enough,
I
right?
don't want to
So
interrupt
thank
you.
you.
I don't want to interrupt you, but thank you for your thoughts. Just want to get a couple more voices in. I want to cap this in 15 more minutes because I need to go to bed. Um, but Guineo, then Jorge, and then I guess Miguel and Yesi. Because those are people who have asked me, and I thank you for being respectful and not speaking over each other. We don't all agree, we don't all like each other, but we need to come together for stuff like this because our ancestors came together to fight fascism 40 years ago, and we should be able to do the same. Okay, Guineo, the mic is yours.
Sure, I'm gonna try to be brief. But I just wanted to bring out a couple points. One being that the most of the support that I've seen for the policies that have been rolling out of El Salvador seem to be coming from a place of personal comfort rather than any meaningful political analysis. It's mostly people saying things such as, "Oh, like I used to feel so unsafe going to El Salvador, but now I'm happy knowing that not trying to hide that I'm like a gringa or I'm from the United States," and it all comes from like them seeing their own personal comfort. But this is of course reactionary because it actually it actually misses a lot of the overarching suppression that affects El Salvador and has been affecting El Salvador for quite a long time. Um, to me, the biggest irony is that Bukeleros are thinking that they're actually addressing the problem by imprisoning people in mass. And I keep saying this whenever I can, but right now El Salvador, to my knowledge, is the number one country in the world in terms of incarcerated people per capita, surpassing the U.S. even. And to me, the actual root of the issue is not just the socioeconomic justice, of course, that El Salvador so desperately needs, but it's also U.S. imperialism. That's the whole reason that we're here in the first place. It all goes back to way even before the Civil War. But mass incarceration itself is something that has been imported from the United States. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if I'm remembering correctly, the security forces of El Salvador, meaning the National Police, the National Guard, the Air Force, the Navy, all of them combined increased something like fivefold during the period of time that the United States was funding the Civil War. And yes, of course, those bodies got dissolved after, but the tradition of increasing policing in El Salvador in El Salvador has only been sustained since. I mean, I can only think back to the 2000s when we had Saka and Funes as well, who both had their own versions of what Bukele is doing right now. You know, they have Manudura and Super Manudura. And I know that there's a lot of talk about whether those two are paying off the gangs or not. And honestly, I don't really care which side you believe. Because the fact is that both presidencies did deploy the military to crack down on gangs, and they did arrest thousands of people during those crackdowns. And in particular, Manulura under Saka, that program did see it did see success in the first 2 years. The homicide rate dropped 14% at the time, but then by 2006, it had increased like back to 2003 levels. And it continued to be so until 2012, where we saw the truce that happened between the gangs. So, like, to me, this is kind of a ticking time bomb because what happened back during Manabura was that a lot of prisons became overcrowded and it was impossible to actually contain any of the people who were inside, to the point that some prisons got taken over by gang members and they were calling shots from inside. They had access to things such as cell phones so they could call shots from the inside. So I just don't see something like this lasting long enough. um, and also, right before I'm about to end, but I also wanted to like bring this all back to Bitcoin as well, because it is not lost to me. I think it was mentioned a couple times earlier that these raids are targeting poor Salvadorans. They're targeting people who live in what used to be guerrilla enclaves. They're targeting people who are working class. They're not going to the rich areas of El Salvador. And to me, Bitcoin kind of plays into this because it is a process of displacing locals, especially those that are low income, by inviting people who are from out of the country to basically buy large plots of land for very little money, to little to no tax. Um, and basically like making conditions generally, it's not different than gentrification, right? Like it's making the living conditions harder for people who lived there for generations.
Yeah.
And yeah, but you can make your own conclusions about that, but I'm gonna leave it there because I'm running on too long.
No, thank you for giving your opinion, and I think it's super important. You said some important things about this Bitcoin stuff is just gentrification, is neocolonialism, is blanqueamiento. Who are these? Who? Why are they courting these gringos while like Salvadorans are bleeding out and having to migrate and die on the way to the United States? Okay, so next is Jorge, then Miguel, then Yessi. I promise I'm trying to get as much as I can in here. Like we got 10 more minutes. Jorge,
All
hurry
right,
up.
so what I wanted to say is about this kind of policing against the poor thing and the kind of carceral system. We think it's only U.S. made and U.S. imported, and its modern, form is. But we also have to think back to what Daniel said earlier about 1932 and the wave of military sweeps that came right before and after that massacre, right? Where the prisons actually swelled to capacity in the 1930s, right? So there's actually a very kind of homegrown carceral tradition is what I'm trying to say. That it's not only U.S. imported. And then now we go back into the present where we have, one of the Bukele project's main cells right now is actually to become the biggest employer in El Salvador. And so policing and militarization is becoming the national industry, right? Come and work in the carceral system. You can be a guard. You can kick someone's ass every day. You can feel, this is the kind of cell that he's doing. And he started it at the beginning of the pandemic where you have all these posters at like bus stops and things that said, become a hero, join the military, join the police. We need more heroes. And so there's a very, homegrown specificity to the carceral culture in El Salvador. And so it's like actually inaccurate to say that it's only coming from the United States. That's all.
Thank you, because we have a long history of our own people being fucked up. And the wine is hitting, so I'm becoming less articulate. So, Miguel, you have next.
Good. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. I've been sick the last couple of days. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and I congratulate you for these spaces. These are very important to counteract the propaganda that we're facing in El Salvador. The propaganda that is spreading through Latin America as well at this moment. Um, the couple points that I wanna make tonight is the first, we shouldn't dismiss the reasons why people were so desperate to have these kind of things in El Salvador. Um, we remember, like, in the last decade, there were a lot of atrocities committed by gangs in El Salvador. Um, for example, the massacre in Opico and everything. So the ground was laid for the people to sell their souls to the devil to resolve the problem, and the devil is Bukele right now. Now he has sold the idea to everybody that he's solving a problem, and his propaganda machine is very effective. Remember that he is a publicist. That's his career, or well, at least that's what he was doing for a living before becoming a politician. Now, when we face a propaganda machine like he has, we need to contrast what he say to what is actually happening on the ground. First thing, uh, there is no high level arrest of leadership of the gangs. We haven't heard any big uh, leaders, or like any national leaders being arrested during this how you call it, like estado de sitio, whatever we calling it. So
Curfew,
that
military curfew.
this curfews, yeah. So that raised a red flag right there. So why is not that happening? Second thing, the pictures that we're having from the Yale, as somebody said earlier, they speak about people that were um, gang members from 20, 25 years ago. They tell me that these people have been over there for a long time, and they're very carefully selected. Like the profile, tattooed, no hair. So it's propaganda. So they handpick the most cliche thing from that. So second, third thing, they call about no homicide days a lot. Oh, we have like 30 days with no homicides, blah blah blah. This reminds me to earlier in the pandemic they were talking about when they started like sort of a pilot program, control territorial control, and they were talking about no homicide day until, for some miraculous reason, a serial killer was discovered in Chalchuapa. He has a mass
Yep.
grave. Yeah, he has a mass grave in Chalchuapa, not far from where I used to
And that
live.
was a police
Uh,
officer too.
and he was a police officer, and there is a
During
lot of,
Bukele's time.
yeah, and there was a lot of uh, rumors about people that was actually on that mass grave. The I'm not going to repeat here because that's a speculation that speak volumes about these things. That it tells you that at least there was some knowledge in the upper leadership about this going on in that place. Uh, Not far from Bukele's former town that he was leading, Nuevo
Mm-hmm.
Cuscatlan, there was
Mm-hmm.
another mass grave. Like right in their noses.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing. Um,
One more minute, because I want to just make sure everybody has a chance to talk.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I'm just gonna finish with this. Right now, we need to focus very carefully in the next few things that he's doing. First thing, somebody mentioned gentrification. They're inviting people from other countries. They're replacing people from rural areas with foreigners. I'm not want to sound xenophobic, but that's the textbook gentrification.
Oh, you could be xenophobic against white people. It's okay.
And the second thing, and this is very important, they know how to conserve power. They're copying what from Heritage Foundation, and the first thing that he went to do, gerrymandering. Right now, there is a big talk about making like eliminating municipalities and reducing the name of diputados, the congressmen and congresswomen. There is a reason behind that, and this gerrymandering. They want to concentrate power in few hands. So we
Mm-hmm.
have to be focusing on those things. Thank you very much. Remember, the Nazis say, accuse other people of what we're doing. That's what they do. They accuse us of the same things that they're doing, negotiations with gang members, all of those things. They accuse the opposition of the very things that they're guilty of. So I leave it at that. Thank you very much, and thank you for the space.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you for adding what you added. So I just want to just hop on. You said these no homicide days that we have. These no homicide days are tomorrow's mass graves, and I'm working on a project to talk about the Chalchuapa case because the Chalchuapa case was a case that happened under Bukele. Chalchuapa, for those of you who aren't aware, Chalchuapa is in Santana Department. It's right next to one of our most precious archaeological sites called Tasumal, which are Mayan historic archaeological sites. I don't call them ruins. I call them archaeological sites. There's a better terming for them, but let's not call them ruins. But so when I think of Chachuapa growing up, I think of going to that place, of going to those field trips to Tasumal, but now it's become the site of a mass grave. And it's important to think about these mass graves because a lot of prisoners, a lot of people who have been detained are being disappeared in these mass graves. And there was another mass grave in Nuevo Cuscatlan. Nuevo Cuscatlan is where Nayib Bukele made his political career. He was mayor of Nuevo Cuscatlan. Univision and Telemundo made all these reports called El Pueblo del Encanto. Look it up, El Pueblo del Encanto, Nayib Bukele, Nuevo Cuscatlan. Lo and behold, there was a mass grave found in his town near where his residence still is. And there was I forget her name at the moment, and I'm sorry about that because I'm super drunk. But Nuevo Cuscatlan, um, there was a mass grave where there was a prominent Salvadoran women's soccer player there. And so Nayib Bukele made his career in Nuevo Cuscatlan, securing it, making it better. And suddenly there's a mass grave under his mandate as president. That's suspicious. We need to ask these questions. Next is Yessie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think thank you everyone for everyone's comments. I'll try to not be too repetitive. But something that I was just reflecting on that I think hasn't been touched on a whole lot, like or named very specifically, is that this is something that's been happening basically throughout the Bukele administration. So the context of this, like this has been a militarized government from the beginning for the last 4 years. And it was really, really clear, obviously, when he took over the legislative assembly with the head of the military and the police, and then imprisoning people for being outside during COVID and infringing on people's, due process rights from the very beginning. And then now with the state of exception. So people have been living under this like really, really intense militarized repression where they're afraid that they can just be arbitrarily detained at any given moment for the majority of this administration. And I think a question I want to raise, or I want to make sure people are asking, is like, what is the strategy behind, like, why is he doing this? And I think it's really important to name that like none of his campaign promises has been fulfilled. Like he actually hasn't followed through with any of the projects that he said he was going to do. Like nothing is actually getting better when it comes to people's immediate needs. I
Mm-hmm.
see you have your mic on.
No, keep
Yeah.
talking. Keep talking.
Yeah, so I think that he's coming to the end of his fifth year, right, in government, and elections are coming up in 2024. And so a really important thing that's happening, a really devastating thing that has been happening throughout this administration is political persecution. So I think that's also a really important thing for us to keep in mind about the amount of people who are being imprisoned, and we can all agree that prisons are not the answer, and that they're not going to stop violence, and that
You're
this.
waking up, yes.
Sorry, I say okay. We can all agree that prisons are not the answer, and that that's not going to solve the issue of gang violence. And also, a vast majority of the people that are being detained and tortured inside of the country's prisons actually have no ties to gangs, or the ties that they have are like extremely loose, right? Because they're a family member, or at some point talked to them, or had to give them money, and a lot of times none of that is true or can be proven. And a group that I would suggest folks look to is like the Comité de Familiares de Víctimas del Régimen del Bajo Lempa, which, as somebody was sharing earlier, this is a region where refugees from the Civil War resettled. And this is happening a lot, where resettled communities are being targeted, which is just so extremely fucked up. And when we think about, does Bukele represent the right or the left? He's very much like deepening the attacks and like following through on work that El Salvador's oligarchy has been carrying out for decades and decades and decades. So in the Bajo Lempa region, just to give kind of a number, I think they said there's been about 300 young people, mostly young men, who have been arrested there. And the family members have identified that 111 of them have absolutely no ties. So the community can vouch for at least 111 of those people. And so a region where the government is trying to or the Bukele clan is trying to really attack that region in particular, take over those lands in particular. So yeah, it's like a continuation of a lot of violence, historical violence that's been happening in El Salvador for decades and centuries. But yeah, just wanted to point out as well that there's been like the impacts of this policy has been to silence political dissent. And within a context of an electoral, elections coming up in 2024, there's absolutely no way, yes, Bukele is likely going to sweep the elections, but he has completely dismantled any possibility for democracy to happen, because he has forced many powerful progressive leaders into exile, many mujeres, and is like arbitrarily persecuting a lot of leftist leaders. And we can have criticisms of past left administrations, but the fact that a judiciary that is completely controlled by an oligarch aligned family means that there is no possibility of fair trial. And it's an administration that is also extremely corrupt. And yeah, people are still taking to the streets regardless. But there is a very, very difficult. The upcoming elections are going to be really, really challenging, given that the level of political persecution that has happened. If you can get put in jail for anything, and the jails are very deadly. I think some things there is recourse for families.
You're
There's
breaking
nothing.
up,
There's
Jesse.
literally okay. There's literally nothing that people can do to access justice in El Salvador. The courts are completely controlled by the Bukele administration, as is the human rights ombudsman. There's literally nothing that they can do. And so sure, we're diaspora, we're not in the country, but it is our responsibility. Like, I think it's really important for us to identify with this struggle, and it's not even just about solidarity.
Jesse, you just cut off.
And I
You just cut off. just a couple more words, and I want to end it. I just want to say a couple of things and then go, but just hurry up. Sorry. Okay, that's all. Okay, I'm sorry to cut you. You said a lot of very important things. Follow Yessi Areli. She has really good political analysis. All of you follow her. There's like 100 of you in here. Please go follow Yessi right now. But um, I just want to say, me and Yessi were in the country at the same time that the February, I forgot what it was in February, where he took, Congress with like, military. Like it was insane. But I just want to say that you know, we may not all agree, we may not all be friends, but I think, we need to come together and talk about these things and come to an agreement that what Bukele is doing is not okay. And I'll just say for me, like, this has weighed on me for a long time. Like, I had a human rights case with my family that was cut short because of the Bukele administration does not care about memoria histórica, and a lot of us are here because of the memoria histórica, because of the war, because of the violence. We're at the point where like gangs have been in El Salvador for so long that it's memoria histórica. Like, if you fled in the 90s because of the gangs, if you fled in the early 2000s because of the gang, that was 20 years ago. That was 30 years ago. So I just want to end this and just thank everybody for tuning in, for putting up with my commentary. This is something that's been incredibly hard for me to just wrap my head around and talk about, because it's hard, and it's just like I self-medicate through this, and it's just been thank you for everyone being just, just being very mindful and respectful of not speaking over each other. I know that some of these fascist Twitter spaces that Nayib Bukele has been doing have been very chaotic, and very I made very clear that they're not allowed. That I did not accept their request because they were trying to come in to invade the space, and this is the first of a lot of spaces. I don't like putting myself out there with this El Salvador stuff. I kind of want to forget it, but like it, for us, Diaspora, it's our duty to have these conversations, to have these spaces. We have the technology for it now. We can do this. And thank you everyone for who joined, who spoke, especially those of you who are from El Salvador, who have lived through this regime. Because, like, yes, it's true. A lot of us do have this privilege of the blue passport, being able to go over there and come back and be safe. But we can't do this alone. We need your insight. And I came into this very, very triggered, very, very, like, this is the reason why I'm slurring my speech a little bit. I came in with a little bit of wine. I have my little, like, beef guisado out on the slow cooker. I'm just like, the incense going, because like this stuff just like raises my heartbeat, and I'm just like, this is very tough, and like it alienates us from some of our family members who are under this fascist propaganda. And I just don't know what else to say, but like I need to go to bed because I have a job in the morning, and I'm on the East Coast. So those of you on the West Coast, do your thing. But let's do more of these. Let's talk more of these. And I'm glad it wasn't just me, Jorge, and Nico. I love you both. Thank you for giving your insights as well. And Nico, I want to hear more from you. Let's organize more of these, and let's be a community. We're a transnational people. We've been through a fucking lot, and we need to have these spaces. And other people will benefit from listening to us, just talking our shit. And I'm not gonna. I can't keep it together for any longer than this. So I'm just gonna end this. And thank you, everybody. It's a little bit messy. That's how it is. This is not the last one. And one last thing I want to say is that like this doesn't leave here. I want y'all to take your learnings. I want you to go to, read Alarca, read Gato Cerrado. These are news agencies in El Salvador. El Faro English. Read stuff. Go through all of them. Alarca SV, Gato Cerrado. They're on Instagram, Twitter. if something resonates with you, if something speaks with you, translate that for your family. Because I know my aunties. My aunties are hardcore communists, and some of you in this chat have met my aunties. They don't have access to this stuff anymore because Bukele has brought the discourse to the internet and has alienated some of our most progressive and incredible elders who cannot participate in this. So if something resonates with you, whether it's a post from Mario, because Mario Gomez is on here and he has a lot to say, or Yessi, or anybody else in here, if something resonates with you, you know, tell your grandparents, tell your mother, tell your cousin, people who don't have access to this platform. Because, one thing that my mother told me is that, she had a grandmother who was illiterate, and the way she would, kind of tell her what's going on is like she would read the newspaper front to back to my grandmother. And my mother has dyslexia, but she somehow like powered through it and read the newspaper to my grandmother every day, and that's how she became sort of aware of things. And I think, we need to do that stuff for our elders as well. And just like, we are a transnational community, but we're also have a lot of intergenerational wisdom. And I'm getting sappy and this is weird. So I'm gonna, log off now. But thank you everybody for joining. This is not gonna be the last one. Maybe next Monday. Let's do next Monday. Jorge, I know you ain't doing shit. And anybody else, let's do this next Monday. Bye.